Welcome back to the course for the Endgames, including today's game is the theme for how to try to survive lost positions. And in this game, I show you the game that I had against Vishy Anand from the candidates matches in Sankinagar in India, 94. I don't remember the game number for this, but as you can see, I played Nimzo with whites and I had no clue what's going on. And with the next move, surprised me, black receives actually winning position. So if you would like to turn off your engines for a second and try to guess the move, that would be great. Okay, so black plays g5, so I take the pawn, but after rook g8, suddenly I realize my queen has no moves, because if the queen goes to f4, or queen goes to h4, black rook goes to g4 and snaps the bishop. So the only way for me to proceed was to play queen h6, but black plays knight takes e4. And this position is absolutely winning for black because I have very bad bishop. My pawns on c4 and c3 are weak. Black has also material advantage. And once all these c4, c3, and d5 pawns are weak, black is just winning. In addition, there is a huge threat of knight f2 using the fork for the queen. So f3 must be played. And black takes on g3, e4, and he decides to play queen f8 and go into the endgame. And we'll see that this was probably not the best decision on black's part, although black keeps a huge advantage still. So first thing first, we have to eliminate the knight on g3, the potential threat to the knight e2 check, activating the king and pushing the knight to h5 or rook to g8. So bishop f4, we really would like the knight on g3 to move away so we can activate the square on h1 for our rook. So knight to h5, and we have to take this knight also. Yeah. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but the pawn on c4 is lost. So theoretically, black has a pure knight and bishop versus rook, which is a huge material advantage of nearly 2 pawns. Also, black has a potential very strong square for the knight. Position is winning. So what to do? First thing to do is not to panic and try to find the best chess under the circumstances. Rook h1, knight f6. The idea is that if black hurries up to place the knight on f4, then he'll have potentially some problems protecting pawn on h7 and activating the king, while white rook enters to h6, 6th rank. So knight f6, the knight is also looking to go to traditional blocking square in d6, where he can hit the pawn, protect the pawn, and also block the d-pawn a la Nimzovich, the classics. a4, played with the idea to be able to play a5 some point. But right now, my goal is to confuse my opponent, so I play the whole board. I play a4, I play g4, and trying to make sure my opponent is not sure where I'm playing, because knowing your opponent is actually pretty important in chess, because then you have sort of an idea what kind of chess he excels at, and you can expect what kind of things he expects you to do, and also which things you expect from your opponent. Also part of the strategy. So a5, for the rooks we need to have open files, so that's why I'm playing a5, trying to undermine the structure. He keeps the game closed and protects the bishop, rook h4. More or less the idea is to protect the pawn on g4, activating the king. So it looks like black is just going to play knight to d6, play h6, and win the game. So what are you going to do? Rook g1, rook h2. Right now I'm focusing on trying to make life as complicated as possible for my opponent and trying to establish a blockade. But f4, because I knew he's going to play knight e8, knight d6, and the knight is unable now to protect the pawn on e5 by playing knight d7, so the knight is a little bit off. And the pawn on e5 is absolutely critical because it stops everything on my part and makes my king very passive. After this trade, white king becomes active. He is also able to protect some pawns. Knight obviously goes to d6. Potentially the knight can go to f7 and again gets the e5 square. However, we continue our attack, but in reality we are trying to activate pieces and especially our rooks, to create space where they can move along the whole board, hit different targets. Rook f6 check, king e3, keeping the king active, knight f7, and now rook f5. And the idea is, again, if he takes, pawn takes, then rook goes to g6 and potentially attacks both pawns. So what happens? He plays king g6, I play king e4, not king f4, because if I play king e4, he plays bishop d3, and black really wants me to take this rook so his king can get to the center, and then he can hit this pawn, and his king sort of blocks my king. So we cannot allow that, so I play knight e4, and I sort of, walking to this fork, right? But if black plays knight d6, king e5, and takes my rook, then suddenly his rook on f6 is actually trapped, and there is no defense against d7, d8. And the white is suddenly winning because the bishop cannot stop this pawn. So this was an amazing trap that I was able to find, and my opponent finally saw it, and he got a little bit worried about this. Yeah, so he plays rook d6, a little panic, just rook d1. Okay, so bishop e2, rook d2, and now black had a huge choice to make. Vishy decided to play bishop c4 instead of taking the pawn on g4, which would be absolutely winning game for him, because after bishop g4, h5, black just has too much extra material, and I absolutely have no counterplay. So the question is, why he didn't take the pawn on g4? And my guess would be that psychology plays a huge part in chess. And for example, a few moves ago, king e4, I'm pretty sure he blundered king e4 because he thought he can play knight d6 check, but as we have seen, knight d6 check is impossible. So suddenly there is this sense of alarm running through your system when you realize you're mortal and you can blunder stuff. So the next time you see something like bishop takes g4, you have huge doubts. Maybe you're blundering something more than that, right? And that means that the role psychology in chess is incredibly large, actually. It's not just making moves, making best moves, but also the notion of how vulnerable you are, or if you're missing something, or how strong you are and your opponent is. So a lot of factors starting to get mixed into this game. So he plays bishop c4. He tries to play safe chess and wait for me to blunder something. But white doesn't really want to blunder anything because he is already at the point where every other move will cost the game. And now black plays rook f6, and he's trying to force, again, the rook trade with the knight on d6. As we can see, that's what he was trying to do. However, this move is a critical blunder, unfortunately. Unfortunately, this simple move of pushing the knight to d6, which looks absolutely natural, but it is a serious blunder because knight on f7 was doing a fantastic job covering absolutely everything. But after knight d6, suddenly white can play rook e3, forcing black to take on t5, which is the only move. And after rook e5, it turns out that the key pawn on c5 is being lost. And this is the key pawn because once the pawn is taken, the rook becomes massively active. It can attack the bishop on b7, which in turn protects the key pawn on a6. The rook also has access to the h5 square, where he can hit the pawn on h6. And this position, despite the fact that the black is still two minor pieces up versus the rook, the number of pawns is even, this is actually equal. And I was pretty sure that at this point my opponent was in the state of shock, because after rook c7 he can take actually the pawn on a5, and after rook h7, rook d7, black has two minor pieces and a pawn, and for one measly rook for white. But this position is draw because black can make no progress. The knight has to protect the bishop because the bishop has to protect the pawn, and the king has to protect the h6 pawn. The coordination in among the black pieces is non-existent. So he plays bishop c8, but white is very accurate. Rook d8, finally decides to activate the bishop, but then we attack the bishop and take this critical pawn. And the rook moves back to the 6th rank. This is optimal place for the rook because it pins the bishop, the king, again, able to counterattack the pawn on b5. And with each pawn trade, we are moving closer to the endgame where white has simply king and rook versus king and bishop and knight. And without pawns, this is obviously a draw. So he tries knight e5. And here, the game was agreed to a draw because again, black chances of winning this game are growing less and less, and this is objectively drawn. So this was a miracle save, and one of the important things in lessons from